So we're going to take a look at a person called William Tyndale. This is a very important man because a lot of people, when arguing, oh, can I trust the Bible? It's been translated and blah, blah, blah. Okay, well, we need to know who did a lot of the translation. William Tyndale was an English scholar who became the leading figure in the Protestant Reformation in the years leading up to his execution. He is well known for his translation of the Bible into English. So if we take a look here, in 1535, Tyndale was arrested and jailed in the castle of Vilvoorde or Filford outside Brussels for over a year. In 1536, he was convicted of heresy and executed by strangulation, after which his body was burned at the stake. Let me just point out that in the, I guess we'll call it the Renaissance period, it was quite popular that people would be killed first by strangulation, and then their bodies would be kind of burnt in like a public display, more so for the humiliation. His dying prayer was that the King of England's eyes would be opened. This seemed to find its fulfillment just 1 year later with Henry's authorization of the Matthew Bible, which was largely Tyndale's own work. So remember I said before the 1611 King James Bible, the one that everyone swears by, there was a Bible before that, and that Bible was called the Matthew Bible. I believe it was published around 1530. So the Matthew Bible, this was the first real English Bible. Before that, the Bible really existed just in Latin. It was called the Latin Vulgate. This was something that you could call it the Catholic Church, but it was just the church at the time. The church had the Bible translated only into Latin. Therefore, if you couldn't read Latin, obviously it would do you no good. And you pretty much had to go to a church to have a priest read it to you. So a lot of trust had to be put in the priest. William Tyndale kind of turned the tables around because he translated the Bible from what they called the vulgar tongue, being English, translated it into English, and this was actually his downfall. The church was infuriated with it. So it says here, with missing sections translated by John Rogers and Miles Coverdale. Tyndale's translation of the Bible was plagiarized for subsequent English translations, including the Great Bible, the Bishop's Bible, authorized by the Church of England. In 1611, 47 scholars who produced the 1611 King James Bible drew significantly from Tyndale's original work, and other translations that descended from his. One estimate suggests that the New Testament in the King James Version is 83% of Tyndale's words, and the Old Testament is 76%. So remember, Tyndale was the one who wrote the Matthew Bible in the 1530s. Basically, everyone plagiarized from his translation because it was a very good translation. If you study Tyndale, you'll find that Tyndale could speak, I believe it was 11 languages, extremely fluently. He was one of the best linguists of his time. So can we trust his translations? Yes, they're actually very good. The 1611 King James Bible and the Matthew Bible, even though they are written in kind of an older English, it's still quite reasonable when you compare it to the Hebrew. There are some problems, and we will deal with those as we come to them. But in regards to translating from Hebrew or Greek, Tyndale was definitely an amazing man at doing so. But this is what led to his death. Once Tyndale had translated the Bible, the church was infuriated because he had translated it into the vulgar tongue of English. The Catholic Church had actually defined people as heretics for owning a Bible, translating the Bible, because they wanted the priests to be able to teach the Bible from the church itself. Basically, a lot of power was taken away from the church when Tyndale had made the Bible available to people who didn't speak Latin, which was the majority of Europe. So what they ended up doing was they had strangled him to death, they had tied him to a post, and then they had burned him to death after he was strangled. So I guess he wasn't burned to death, he was strangled to death and then burned. Another interesting fact that I've heard from my different research into history books was that Tyndale was not just burned at the stake, they actually tied a Bible around his neck, just kind of sending a message to everyone. This was kind of the early period also where you saw the Protestant Reformation, because what really started the Protestant Reformation, for those of you who know, I mean, there was just the church. There wasn't Catholic and Protestant, it was just the church. And what happened was there was a man called Martin Luther. And when he got his hands, there was also John Calvin, but when Martin Luther specifically got his hands on the 1611 King James Bible, he read it for himself, and he started to notice, he's like, hey, wait a minute. The priests and the church here, they're doing things that are not in this book, and they're totally different than what's written in this book. And eventually what happened was when they built the St. Peter's Basilica, not the first one, but the second one, the one that we see today, that was the straw that broke the camel's back for Martin Luther. Martin Luther, when he heard that the priests were going around and asking for what was called an indulgence, this is what basically started, I would think, the the bulk of the Protestant Reformation was already kind of starting, but that was really the straw that broke the camel's back. What happened was Martin Luther heard about the church asking for indulgences, and this is what an indulgence is. Basically, if you had a loved one, or maybe even yourself, who had lived a very sinful life, and there was concern that they were going to go to hell, you could pay the church an indulgence. And you can obviously guess an indulgence means money, right? You can pay money. So the church was accepting donations for you to kind of get rid of some of the sin that you had accumulated, or your father or your grandfather had accumulated. So that way, and keep in mind, they were also teaching a doctrine of purgatory. They were teaching that they could spend less time in purgatory, or, avoid facing hell. So this is something that obviously is not biblical. It pushed Martin Luther off the edge. He wrote a thesis, and then he delivered that thesis to, I can't remember how many different churches, but he nailed it to the front door. And this is one of the big reasons there was a divide in the church, which caused the Protestants and the Catholics. When you're saying the word Protestant, what you're really saying is you're protesting, and who they're protesting was the church. So let's look at the structure now. We've got 39